There's a phrase, spoken by an anonymous person close to Qatar's government, that the Financial Times published Monday morning. And honestly, it contains more strategic honesty than anything we've heard from any American official, any Israeli general, or any Gulf foreign minister since Operation Epic Fury began. Because in 9 words, it describes exactly what Qatar has decided to do to bring this war to an end. The phrase is, a cascade of economic harm. A production halt would endanger every region as Qatar Energy provides critical energy to over 120 countries, the source said, adding that there would be a cascade of economic harm. And I want you to notice what that is and what it isn't. It's not framed as a warning. It's not dressed up as a threat. It's a description. A cold, technical description of what happens next. Because cascade isn't just a dramatic word. It's a specific engineering term. A failure that propagates through a system in sequence, where one breakdown triggers the next, and the next, and the next, until the system reaches a state that cannot be reversed by any single intervention. That's what Qatar shut down its LNG production knowing it would trigger. Knowing European gas prices would spike, fast. Knowing Asian LNG benchmarks would jump, fast. Knowing that within hours, procurement desks across the industrial world would start firing off emergency alerts. Every German factory, every French power station, every Italian steel mill, every South Korean petrochemical plant that depends on Qatari LNG would feel it almost immediately. And Qatar shut it anyway. Let's be very clear about what happened. Qatar halted LNG production at the world's largest export facility after it was targeted in an Iranian drone attack. An unprecedented halt that covers roughly 1/5 of global liquefied natural gas supply. 1/5. Gone. Bloomberg called it unprecedented Monday morning. Not concerning, not significant. Unprecedented. Meaning, in the entire history of global LNG markets, through the 1973 oil embargo, through the Abqaiq attack, through the 2022 Russian pipeline cutoff that nearly deindustrialized Germany, nothing has produced the simultaneous halting of 20% of global LNG supply in a single morning. And here's the part that most financial coverage still refuses to say out loud. Qatar is not just a victim of Iranian drones. Qatar has made a decision. This LNG shutdown is not merely a response to physical damage. It is not merely a safety pause. It is not simply infrastructure disruption. It is a weapon. And it's the one weapon a country like Qatar still has, when it has no air force capable of stopping Iran, no missile stockpile big enough to matter, and no remaining diplomatic channel to Washington that actually works in the moment that counts. Qatar can't stop the war with jets. Qatar can't stop the war with phone calls. But Qatar can make the cascade so economically unbearable for Europe, for Japan, for South Korea, for China, that those governments stop the war for it. That's the strategic math. And Iran understands that math too. A defense studies lecturer at King's College London put it bluntly. Iran knows exactly what it's doing by attacking Gulf countries, because these countries have less appetite for a fight since, at the end of the day, this is not their war. That line, "this is not their war," explains the entire strategic position of every Gulf state right now. They are absorbing drone strikes and missile pressure in exchange for hosting American bases. Bases that the United States used in operations that escalated everything, including the killing of Iran's supreme leader. And every hour this operation continues is another hour where refineries, LNG terminals, hotels, ports, and airports in countries that had no vote in Trump and Netanyahu's decision become legitimate targets in Iran's eyes. So Qatar's LNG shutdown becomes the economic equivalent of a hostage situation, except the hostage isn't a person. The hostage is European industrial output. And the demand isn't ransom. The demand is simple. Make America stop. The document that hit markets Monday forces the question every energy economist in Europe woke up asking. If Qatari LNG is gone, and Russian pipelines are sanctioned, where does Europe's gas come from? Because yes, China, Japan, and South Korea will be hit by this too. But Europe is uniquely exposed right now for one brutal reason. Europe is coming out of winter with relatively low gas inventories, below 30% storage. That's the position on the morning Qatar Energy shuts down. The buffer that should have accumulated through a mild winter heating season isn't there, and it's not warm enough yet for industrial demand to collapse. So right now, in early March, Europe's gas-burning industrial base is still operating at full demand. Steel mills, chemical plants, fertilizer producers, glass manufacturers. They're running today. They're pulling from reserves that are already about 10 percentage points below last year's level at the same point on the calendar. Now take 20% of global LNG supply offline. Now add a Strait of Hormuz that is conditionally closed, with hundreds of vessels anchored at the entrance. Now add Maersk suspending transits through Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb simultaneously. And suddenly analysts are talking about a prolonged loss from the Middle East that could reach 120 billion cubic meters per year, a volume greater than the total Europe lost when Russia shut off pipelines after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Put that in context. The drop in Russian pipeline gas in 2022 was around 80 billion cubic meters. So when a researcher at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy says, carefully, academically, that this Middle East disruption could be bigger than Russia 2022, what they're really saying is, the comparison point is the crisis that sent European gas prices to historic extremes, forced Germany to restart coal plants, forced France to cut industrial output, and pushed households into the heating versus eating nightmare through the winter of 2022 and 2023. That crisis is the benchmark, and this one, potentially, is larger. But now comes the dimension that makes this crisis structurally different from 2022, different in a way that should terrify European governments. In 2022, Russia cut supply as retaliation, and the LNG market, while stressed, still had some flexibility. Other suppliers could increase output or redirect cargoes. Norway, the United States, Trinidad, Australia, there was at least a sense that additional volumes could be squeezed out, reshuffled, rerouted. Today, the American LNG market is running at 100% capacity. There is no spare American production to redirect. We're maxed out, as one energy finance professor put it. You can't magically boost LNG production if you're already running at full capacity. You're waiting on new projects to be constructed, and those don't arrive in a week, or a month, or sometimes even a year. So the country whose president launched this war, the country that produces the world's largest volume of LNG, cannot provide Europe replacement supply because its own export terminals are already operating flat out. Which means the cascade Qatar's source described isn't a future scenario, it's present tense arithmetic, and the math does not have a convenient American solution. Now add another detail people are overlooking. Shell, ExxonMobil, Total Energies, and ConocoPhillips are all investors in Qatar's LNG facilities. 4 of the world's biggest energy companies have billions of dollars of production equity sitting idle at Ras Laffan right now. And it's sitting idle not simply because Iran hit something. Because according to Qatar's own defense ministry, we're talking about 2 drones, one striking a water tank at a power plant in Mesaid, another hitting an energy facility at Ras Laffan. The physical damage was assessed, and production was halted anyway. Because this decision was never only about physical damage, it was about the cascade, it was about the leverage. It was about forcing the world to feel, in price spikes, in supply panic, in industrial alarms, what it means when Qatar decides to stop being the quiet, reliable LNG backbone of the global system. There's an industrial chain, an invisible sequence of dependencies, that connects a Qatari gas molecule to a loaf of bread on a supermarket shelf in Berlin. Most people never think about that chain. They don't have to, until it breaks. And it is breaking right now. And the speed at which it breaks is going to determine how long this war lasts, more reliably than any missile count, any interceptor stockpile estimate, or any diplomatic communique from any intermediary country. Here's how the chain works. Natural gas heats industrial furnaces. Those furnaces produce steel. Steel builds the machinery that produces fertilizer. Fertilizer grows food. And gas also produces ammonia directly, the primary input for nitrogen fertilizer. So when gas prices surge in a single morning, the cost of producing ammonia spikes immediately. Within weeks, the cost of nitrogen fertilizer follows. Within months, the cost of planting the spring crop rises. And by summer, the food price cascade that started with drone strikes in Qatar reaches retail shelves. Bread in Germany, pasta in Italy, cooking oil in Poland. This is what cascade means in real life. Not just charts on trading desks, but everyday household survival costs. And as the Columbia researcher said plainly, you're going to have an impact on gas prices, you're going to have an impact on heating bills, and you're going to have an impact on electricity bills. Those 3 categories touch every European family, not just wealthy households with solar panels and heat pumps, but average families in ordinary apartments across cities that rely on gas heat and gas-powered electricity. And now imagine what this means for European governments. These are the same governments whose prime ministers and presidents are condemning the American-Israeli strikes in carefully measured language. Britain signaling it doesn't believe in regime change from the sky, France calling for maximum restraint, Germany debating and hesitating in public. These are governments that already received political mandates built on energy security and economic stability. They're facing elections. They're facing industrial lobbying. They're facing trade union pressure. And now they're facing energy benchmarks surging so hard that voters will experience it as a personal financial injury, soon. And in the middle of that, look at what Moscow does. On Monday, Vladimir Putin spoke separately with the UAE president and with Qatar's Emir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. The Kremlin said they expressed concern about the conflict widening and hoped for rapid de-escalation. Putin called the Qatari Emir personally, not through intermediaries, not through the UN, directly. Why? Because Qatar's shutdown sends European prices to levels where Russian pipeline gas, on whatever terms Moscow offers, starts to look more economically attractive than any alternative left in the market. When Putin says rapid de-escalation, what he means is Europe picks up the phone. Europe calls Moscow. Moscow provides gas. And American strategic leverage over European energy policy ends. The post-Ukraine energy realignment reverses in a week, and Russia emerges from a war it didn't start and wasn't formally a party to as the indispensable energy partner of a continent that spent 3 years trying to become independent of it. Now zoom back to Qatar itself, because the cruelty here is that Qatar didn't choose this war. Qatar hosted the base, and the war chose Qatar. The source document makes a brutal point with simple clarity. Iran has gas. Qatar has gas. But Qatar built Ras Laffan, sold its gas to the world, and used that revenue to build towers, airports, stadiums, and a global diplomatic reputation. And now, in 1 week, every pillar of that reputation is smoking. Terminals are idle. Tourism evaporates. Executives reconsider relocating regional headquarters to Doha. Property prices fall. LNG revenue halts. Early warning radar that cost $500 million becomes rubble. And the Al Udeid Air Base, the base Qatar built, maintained, and kept operational at enormous political cost to its relationship with Iran, the base used by American jets in the operation that killed Iran's supreme leader, becomes the reason Qatar is being targeted, destabilized, and economically detonated. So the cascade is not just economic, it's a legitimacy cascade, a chain reaction in the political justification for the entire American alliance system in the Gulf. Because once Bahrain's hospitals are full, Qatar's LNG is shut, Saudi infrastructure is threatened, the UAE's systems are disrupted, and European gas is up massively. Every population in every country absorbing these strikes asks its government the same question. Was hosting the American base worth this cascade? And that's why Qatar's anonymous spokesperson didn't offer a threat. They offered a verdict. A cascade of economic harm. So share this message with every contact you have right now, because people are still treating this like a routine supply disruption. And it's not. Qatar shut down 20% of global LNG supply, not only because of damage, but as a deliberate lever to pressure Europe to pressure Trump. European gas benchmarks surged hard. America's LNG terminals are maxed out. There's no replacement supply waiting in the wings. The potential loss volume is bigger than what Russia did in 2022. Putin called the Qatari Emir personally, and the cascade, from gas prices to electricity bills to fertilizer to food, has already begun.